Look, let's just cut to the chase here. I know Madam Web is bad, you know Madam Web is bad, but the real question that lingers in your brain is, just how bad is it? Does it function in any way, shape or form? Or is this truly the film that tops Morbius as the worst thing Sony Marvel has ever created? And before we get into this, I'm mostly just going to be talking about the story and the plot, not really talking about the acting and the special effects, because it's all bad. Seriously bad. I usually like a lot of these actors. I know how good these actors and actresses can be, but they are completely fucking awful in this film. And the special effects make the rubbery early 2000s CGI look like God's gift in comparison. It makes the weird Dwayne Johnson CGI in The Mummy Returns look like the Holy Grail. For the life of me, I cannot tell you where the $80 million budget went into, because it certainly wasn't into the writing, the special effects, the fight scene coordination, or making full use of the actors. I don't really have any clips that I can show you. You can just use this video as background noise and listen to it if you want, but I will have still images to help my points. So if you're the type of person who likes to play games or do chores while listening to stuff, well, what can I say except you're welcome. So with that intro out the way, let me begin ranting in your ear about how shit of a film this is. So the movie starts in the 1970s, and immediately the film just dumps on you that these two characters, Constance Webb and Ezekiel Sims, are looking for a spider that will give them superpowers. In the first minute, that's a piece of dialogue that happens. They just start talking about this spider and how it makes the tribe people into spidermen. Like, you've been on this expedition for months and this is the first time you're talking about this nonsense? After she finds the spider, Ezekiel immediately just goes full on evil asshole mode and guns down the rest of the search party. He doesn't even bother to threaten them. He doesn't kill Constance right away though, because if he did that then the rest of the plot wouldn't happen and he wouldn't have anyone to explain his goals to, which aren't really a thing anyways. He gives some vague justification about how he was born poor and he takes every opportunity he has, but that's about it when it comes to motive for him doing this. As they struggle over the spider, Constance is shot, with Ezekiel running away after seeing the tree shake. We see that a bunch of, I guess you would call them spiderman tribesmen, arrive on the scene. This arrival scene is garbage by the way. It doesn't even show the tribesmen in the trees. The production crew just shook the trees during filming and expected you to believe that there's a person in these trees that have no coverage to actually hide a person in them. Now, these people move incredibly quickly, but after seeing the murdered people and Constance dying, none of them try and take Ezekiel down, despite the fact that he is alone and much slower than them and they know the terrain better. I genuinely have no idea why they would have the morality to help this dying pregnant woman, but not the morality to bring her attacker to justice. Oh, that's right, because then the plot would end. Oh yeah, by the way, she's pregnant. Because venturing into the Amazon rainforest where there's no hospitals or good hygiene is the perfect place to go when you're 9 months pregnant. They try and justify this later, but come on. There's no justification for this. They've just done the Across the Spider-Verse thing again. So the tribesmen take Constance to their cave, and they let one of the spiders bite her. As she gives birth, the tribesman, in fluent English, says that he will give the answers to her daughter when she grows up. And then Constance just kind of dies? So what exactly was the point of letting the spider bite her then? If she's so on the brink of death that she dies less than a minute after the spider bites her and she gives birth to her daughter, why even let the spider bite her in the first place? Just let it bite the baby instead. And hold on, what do you mean you'll give the baby answers when she comes back? They're from America. How are you, a tribesman with no idea who this woman is or where she comes from, going to get this baby back to America? Oh, the film just skips over that part. It literally just takes us straight to 2003 and the baby is a fully grown Cassandra with any details about how she was sent back to America is just not in the film. So Cassandra works as a paramedic in New York. We then get what is supposed to be a thrilling scene of Cassandra racing through New York to get an injured woman to hospital. But no, just no. She's going maybe 20, 25 miles an hour at most. There's barely any traffic in the roads, and she's constantly looking over her shoulder to talk to Ben Parker, which makes it all the more jarring when she decides to start driving on the pavement full of people when she could just go around the vehicles, who seem to be driving on the road even slower than she is. And yeah, like I say, she just drives on the opposite side of the road constantly, even when there's plenty of space on the road for her to drive on. Like, you understand that emergency vehicles will only do this if they have to, not because they can't be bothered to swerve through traffic. It's also very obvious that what Cassandra is doing in the driving seat has no relation to what is going on around her. At one point she moves the wheel to the right and then the ambulance just decides to swerve left. It's hilariously bad. It's like Dakota Johnson was just told to randomly swerve the wheel around. We then get some bad dialogue to give us some exposition about Ben Parker and how he was in the army. You know, a conversation they should have already had long before this scene takes place. As she's driving, she nearly hits a teenager who's conveniently skateboarding on the opposite side of the road and doesn't spot the massive ambulance heading her way. But to be fair, for some reason the sirens are no longer on, which Cassie has to switch back on. As she's parked up after just nearly hitting the kid, Cassie then proceeds to just stop there and rant about kids these days. If only there was something more important that she should be doing, like driving the dying woman back to hospital. In the hospital, we get an awkward scene of Cassie not wanting to accept a child's drawing for some reason. Like, the movie is trying to describe her as being socially awkward and not understanding the norms of society, but you're 30 and you've never had a child give you something before? Have you spent your entire life in a coma or... In the break room, we get more expository dialogue between the two, where Cassie describes how she was a foster kid and that Ben is in a relationship. It then, and I cannot stress this enough to you, uses a fortune cookie to give a sly nod to the audience about what Cassie's powers are going to be. That's right, you know that very tired cliche where people use fortune cookies to highlight part of the plot? It just straight up explains to the audience that she will have some sort of powers involving the future and visions, because her fortune cookie is incomplete. Truly, the pinnacle of foreshadowing. She then gets home and lets a cat into her apartment, giving it a bowl of milk and then saying, word for word, "Us strays have to stick together." This movie has no faith in your reading comprehension. They might as well have a guy come out on screen and shout, "Get it, guys? Because she's socially awkward and doesn't like people. Do you get it now? Or do we need to keep making even more obvious parallels, you dumb fucking idiots?" Cassie then goes to her room and puts the drawing the child gave her in a suitcase full of her belongings. 2 minutes ago she didn't want this thing and wanted to put it in the trash, but I guess now she just likes random stuff that people give her. She had a character arc speedrun off screen apparently. Anyways, she opens the suitcase up and there's just a bunch of things here that don't make sense. The tribesmen have so little contact with the outside world that they are considered an urban myth by most people. Hence why people think trying to find the spiders that give them powers is a wild goose chase. So they wouldn't have any ties to any government bodies or agencies. They would have no idea who Constance is and no idea where she comes from. But not only did they know to send Cassie back to America, but they also took her mother's journal and sent that back with her. Apparently they just knew that Cassie would need this journal and sent it with her. And no one took any interest in it or why Constance Webb just disappeared and her journal appeared with a random baby. We then cut to Cassie and Ben arriving at an accident scene, where one of the vehicles is dangling off the side of a bridge. And what does Cassie decide to do? Climb into the front of the car with the passenger, the side that's dangling off the side of the bridge. The side that will push the car into the water if any more weight is added to it. She then cuts the passenger down from the ceiling, applying even more force to the front of the car. But surprisingly, the car doesn't move, it stays still. So I guess the car is just stuck and nothing's going to happen. But immediately after this, after Ben drags the heavy male occupant from the front of the car and takes a considerable amount of weight off that side of the car that's dangling off the bridge, the car just starts to tip over and Cassie falls in the river. Do the writers not understand what physics are? After falling into the river, she has a very bad CGI dream sequence where these web tendrils just float around her. And she sees and hears a bunch of random stuff before waking up when Ben revives her. As he's getting her checked out, he goes to discharge her, only for her to end up at the start of the conversation that they were just having, confusing both her and Ben. We then cut to an older Ezekiel attending the opera, and we get one of the weirdest flirtation scenes I've ever seen. So Ezekiel sits down next to a woman, catching her eye. He then proceeds to just pick up a random fashion magazine that is lying on the floor, and then gives it to this woman who clearly has no interest in it and already has a magazine that she's reading. Like, what is this? In terms of flirting, this is just some random bullshit, and for some reason it works. After having sex with the woman, he has a dream about a group of costumed women attacking him in a poorly edited fight scene where they keep randomly posing for the camera. He is then kicked out the window, dying before waking up in the present, and he then proceeds to exposition dump on this woman that these are visions of the future that he keeps having. During this talk, he tells her that he knows how to find these women now due to the advancements in technology, the same advancements that the NSA has, alerting this woman that he knows that she's an agent and that he wants her technology. We then get a really bad jump scare scene. So when Ezekiel is on one side of the bed, The woman reaches for her purse on the table next to her side of the bed. As she grabs her gun, she then turns back to look at him, only for him to grab her wrist and take the gun away. But by the logic of the scene, she grabs the gun, looks down at the bottom of the bed, sees Ezekiel at the bottom of the bed heading towards her, but then decides to keep turning her head and look at the opposite side of the bed where he just was. Like, yeah, we as an audience can't see him at the bottom of the bed, but she should have spotted him by this point. But then she's genuinely surprised when he grabs her hand. It completely fails in every single way possible. After grabbing her and removing her gun, he begins to inject poison into her, demanding her password to her surveillance technology if she wants to live. She gives this password, but he kills her anyways, which seems like a really stupid thing to do. As far as I'm aware, he hasn't said anything that could incriminate him in anything, and this is an NSA agent, so surely they would come after him if he kills her. So I really don't understand the logic of why he would do this if his main goal is to not get killed by someone. Cassie then arrives at a cookout that Ben invited her to, and despite earlier showing that she struggles in social situations and doesn't really understand conversation etiquette, here she has no problem talking to people and making jokes around them. I guess the writers just kind of forgot what they already made her character as. We then go inside the house and Cassie introduces herself to Mary Parker, Ben's sister-in-law who is pregnant with Peter. The group then play a game where they write something fond about their mothers on a piece of paper, put it in a basket, and then Mary has to figure out which piece of writing belongs to which guest. And for some reason, despite the fact that she doesn't have any memories of her, Cassie decides that instead of just not participating in the game, which would be the normal thing to do, she puts a blank piece of paper in the basket. And when it's pulled out, she says the reason her piece is empty is because her mother died in childbirth, making jokes when the party gets awkward. So we've gone from someone who is so inept that she cannot even talk to a child in a normal conversation, then to someone who has no problems making banter and jokes with other partygoers, to someone who is socially awkward but has no problem talking and laughing on with other people, even about subjects like the slow and brutal childbirth and eventual death of her own mother. For the love of God, pick a personality for your main character and stick with it. As the group try and guess what Mary has named the baby, Cassie once again goes back in time to the start of the conversation, and there's actually a joke here that I thought was funny. During the first time around, Cassie accepts one of the food items being passed around, only to spit it out in disgust later. When the woman offers her a piece of food, she just looks at her with a face of disgust and gets her to move along. It's not an amazing joke, but I thought it was funny at least. As Mary once again asks Cassie about what her guess for the baby name is, Cassie asks if going through this conversation again is part of the game or a big joke, clearly in confusion about reliving events again. And I've got to wonder, is she dense? It's not like this is just a conversation that's repeating. People have teleported back to the opposite side of the house and a balloon that was destroyed magically reappears in front of her to be destroyed again. But apparently that's not enough for her to realise that something is seriously wrong and this isn't a normal conversation. Ben and Cassie are then called away to deal with a fire, and as she is giving CPR to someone, she keeps having visions of a medical officer dying in front of her. We then get this weird thing where the guy she's giving CPR to just kinda opens his eyes and now he's fine. If you were giving CPR, then that would mean that this man's heart stopped, which means that if he is now conscious, he should be desperately gasping for air. So either this is one of the most calmest, most composed people in existence who is completely nonplussed about coming back from the dead, Cassie is just doing CPR on some random dude who is lying down, or the actor just phoned it in and the director couldn't be bothered to do a retake. All three options are dumb. As Cassie tries to stop the officer from getting in the ambulance, he drives off, and then a truck crashes into him. Somehow, the ambulance driver, who is a trained professional, didn't spot the enormous 2-ton truck that was casually driving down the road, and decided to immediately pull out in front of it. So as Cassie tries to give him medical attention, this massive, dramatic, sad soundtrack plays in the background, and I have no idea why. Not only does Cassie not even seem to be close to this dude, but we've known him for less than 30 seconds. This movie is giving a big dramatic death scene to a guy with about 2 lines of dialogue. It's fucking bizarre. We cut to Ezekiel asking a colleague about the technology, who somehow not only has managed to create a perfect photo of the women who will kill him, but can also tell what these people look like now, despite the fact that their faces are covered by masks. And forgive me if I'm wrong, but I thought the whole point of wearing masks was so that people don't understand what you look like underneath them. But according to Madam Web, apparently regular NSA surveillance technology is fully capable of just identifying people through masks and de-aging them. After having a doctor take a look at her and getting no results, she takes a week off to process things. During this time, she has another vision, except this time it makes even less sense. She hears the microwave beeping, and when she gets off the sofa to go get it, she accidentally burns her hand on the popcorn, causing a glass dish to shatter. At the same time, a window is cracked by a pigeon smashing into it. Then, as she begins to open the window, things reset, and the same events play again, except this time she has just stood by the window this whole time, having not been sent back to the sofa once these events started happening again. So, can Cassie just teleport now? When the movie showed the previous vision with the officer dying, it showed her kneeling with the injured man right outside the building. And then while she was still with this man, it showed her visions of her kneeling in the road with the officer's body. And then the visions ended and she was back with the kneeling man. This gives the audience the idea that she herself isn't moving. She is just seeing a future vision of events in her head, before snapping back to where she actually is in the present day once they finish. But in this scene here, after the vision ends and everything resets, she is still stood by the window instead of being on the sofa, which is where she was at when the previous version of these events started to happen. Which, by the logic of this scene, means that these visions aren't off the future. This is just real life events that play out, and then her physical body is both teleported into the past and into where she was standing when the vision ended. But that can't be the case, because if that's what happened, then surely there would be a previous version of Cassie sat on the sofa, about to experience the visions for the first time. To sum up how awful this is, we are 30 minutes into this film. She has had her powers for 15 minutes and already the movie has fucked up how they accurately work. So anyways, now that she has the window open, a very hilarious CGI pigeon flies into her apartment and she begins to realise that she can see the future. As Cassie goes to the subway, we cut back to the tech colleague using the NSA gear. And let me tell you, the laziness of the writing here is astounding. In this scene, not only is Cassie getting on the train, but so is Julia Cornwall, Mattie Franklin and Anya Corazon, the three women that they are actively looking for. And on top of this, Ezekiel just so happens to be right next to the train station when he's told this. So later, when all four of these women get on the exact same train in the exact same carriage, it gives him the opportunity to try and kill them. And on top of that, the movie genuinely has the balls to have the tech girls say, "What are the odds of all of them being in the same place at the same time? Fuck you, you badly written pile of garbage." So as they get on the train, Cassie keeps getting stuck in visions, seeing the same people arriving on the train, seeing the other three girls board it, and then seeing Ezekiel coming to kill them. And to be honest, I don't really have much of a problem with this scene. I would say it's fine. It even has a good transition effect I like, where a man walks across the screen and Cassie, who has had her jacket off, all of a sudden has her jacket back on. I know it's a basic idea, but I don't know, I liked it, it was smoothly done. But now that I've given it praise, I do have one problem with this. So in her visions it shows Ezekiel coming onto the train and brutally killing the three girls. And I have to ask, is he stupid? Because this isn't when he's wearing a costume, he's just in a suit with his face exposed. So his plan here was to board the train, very publicly kill three girls, and then just walk away, as if the authorities wouldn't try and start a manhunt for him. It doesn't end up happening that way, but that was his plan. So Cassie gets the girls off the train and then Ezekiel spots them. And considering how strong and fast the tribesmen were, you would expect him to immediately smash through the train and try and kill them. But instead he decides to try and run to the train doors and somehow not open them until the train is nearly out of the station and on the opposite side of the platform to where they are. On top of this, he has somehow changed into his costume, despite the fact that this gives them even more time to run away. And on top of that, a previous scene showed him in a shirt with a few of the top buttons undone, showing that he isn't wearing a costume underneath his clothes. But if that's the case, then I don't know where he got his costume from, because he doesn't have a bag either. So the only way that this scene would make sense is if he had a random costume stashed away in a random subway station to put on at a random time. I'm not joking about this. As they board a different train, we hear the train conductor talk over the speaker system about the customers having their tickets ready, before the sound of glass smashing and the conductor begging for his life blasts over the speakers before cutting dead. which would imply that Ezekiel has smashed through the front of the train, killed the conductor, and is now going to make his way through the train to kill them. But when the girls get off this train and make a run for it, we see him just chilling on top of the train, not really doing anything. So he went on top of the train, jumped down in front of the train, smashed through the front, killed the train conductor and alerted the girls to his presence, and then hopped back out of the train and just started to chill on top, slowly crawling across it. What was the fucking point of that? So Ezekiel spots them heading towards the exit, and he doesn't go after them, despite the intro showing just how quick someone with these abilities can move. As they're leaving, the cops then proceed to just randomly arrest Cassie. Genuinely, I cannot explain why they do this, they just do. As they're arresting her, Ezekiel now teleports in to use his powers, effortlessly killing the cops before proceeding to just sit there and let the girls run away again. So the girls run out onto the street, where they see a taxi driver taking some bags out for a customer and counting his money. They then proceed to run right past him, shouting next to him while slowly climbing into his taxi, and he doesn't know that people are climbing into his taxi to steal it until Cassie starts to drive away. If I was stood next to my car and 4 screaming people started to get into it, I think I would notice before they rev up my engine and speed off. As Cassie begins driving, the girls start arguing in the back. And I guess this was supposed to be a scene where Cassie loudly yells at them to shut up, but Dakota Johnson's voice just stays the exact same level the entire time. It makes it come across that the girls are shutting up not because of a strong, vocal individual telling them to, but because a weakling pathetically pleaded with them to be quiet, so they did it out of pity. As they drive, a news report comes on saying that Cassie is wanted for kidnapping the girls and attacking police officers, with apparently no one spotting or reporting the giant blue man that was walking around on walls and throwing cops around like ping pong balls, which conveniently makes Cassie a wanted criminal. And for some reason Cassie blames Julia, as she had called out to the cops that Cassie was trying to kidnap them before they realised that she was saving them from Ezekiel. But that's just nonsensical, because these police officers didn't even hear Julia, because if they had, then they would have started walking towards them and arrested them earlier in this scene, which they didn't do, which just makes Cassie come across as a bitch. So, what's Cassie's plan now? I mean, the obvious plan would be to go to the police, let all 4 girls explain what happened, and then Cassie can clear her name, right? Nope. Instead, Cassie decides that she is going to effectively kidnap the girls until they figure out what is going on. We then get a scene of Ezekiel blaming the tech girl for the girls not being dead, when he's the guy with super speed and enhanced strength that somehow couldn't kill 4 defenseless girls but can easily take on 8 fully armed cops. As Cassie talks to them in the woods, she explains that weird stuff has been happening and that she doesn't have any answers. She then says that she can see the future. And in the discussion surrounding her powers and what Ezekiel did, do you want to know what pushes the plot forward? Matty says that Ezekiel was walking on the ceiling, with the other girls correcting her, saying that he was crawling, like a spider. And this one statement is enough for Cassie to realise that he has the powers of the magic Amazon spider tribesman that her mother was trying to find, with her reading a bunch of expository dialogue to the stray cat to try and tell the audience how she came to this conclusion. In case you haven't realised it yet, this film is fucking awful. We then get another joke that I don't think is too bad. Cassie wonders about her powers, and after reading the journal entries, she thinks that she might have the same abilities that Ezekiel does. So she goes to climb the wall and the music swells up and gets really dramatic, and as she tries to climb the wall she just splatters off it and falls to the ground. It's not the most amazing joke in the world, but I enjoyed it. Good job, film. 2 very small jokes that I think you did well in this pile of horseshit. Cassie then finds a photo in the journal, realising that Ezekiel was with her mother when she died and finding out who he is. Getting bored and hungry, the girls decide to go to a diner to get some food, where one of the attendants spots them, and looking at the nearby newspaper, realises that these are the kidnapped girls that the police are looking for, and so he phones the emergency services, and I'm really not sure why. On the newspaper it is very zoomed out and it's a struggle to even see the girls on the photo. So I'm not sure how he instantly spotted that these were the exact same girls. But then apparently the fact that they're relaxing, eating and trying to flirt with some nearby boys instead of crying and asking people for help doesn't even make him reconsider that they might just be normal girls trying to get some food. He also doesn't even bother to try and ask them if they're okay. He just somehow instantly knows that they're kidnapped despite not behaving in any way like they are, and so he decides to phone the cops. On top of that, how does he have a newspaper detailing these events? Didn't this just happen like 4 hours ago? You're telling me that this newspaper got made within those 4 hours and then got sent out to bumfuck nowhere? As the guy phones the cops, the tech girl finds the call and informs Ezekiel of their location. As he gets in the car to start driving, he hacks into the dispatcher's comms and, pretending to be a police officer, tells them not to send backup to the diner, and tells them that the girls spotted there aren't the ones they're looking after, keeping the police off their tracks. As Cassie finds that the girls aren't in the woods, she goes to the diner, finding them there. Ezekiel then follows them in, killing all of them before the vision ends and goes back to Cassie in the woods. I mean, overall it's okay. I do like the little transition as Ezekiel flips onto the ceiling, but apart from that there's nothing here that really wowed me. But also, in the last vision she had where she moved around, back in her apartment, Cassie went from the sofa to the window and then the vision ended and she was still at the window, implying that she switches locations when these visions end. So in this case, why does this vision just bring her back to the taxi? If we follow the logic of the apartment scene, shouldn't she just teleport inside the diner? How did the writers and the directors really mess up this vision power so much? Thank fuck I didn't see this in theatres, fuck me. Realising what will happen, Cassie races to the diner in the taxi, smashing into Ezekiel as he enters the diner and rescuing the girls, although Ezekiel infects Cassie with his poison abilities before she leaves. In the taxi, once again, the scene is supposed to be Cassie scolding the girls and telling them off, but once again Dakota really doesn't change her voice in this scene. She just sounds more like a condescending mother over someone who is angry and frightened about people being killed. Also throughout this scene, despite being in country roads that are constantly twisting and turning, for some reason Cassie keeps taking her eyes off the road and turning her head to talk to them, showing a complete lack of common sense, which is especially egregious as she is supposed to be an excellent driver because of her job. Outside the diner, Ezekiel is pacing around in the parking lot, and for some reason he's taken his mask off. Like, I doubt anyone here would be able to see his face or be able to identify him, but this seems like a very stupid thing to do. Why even have a mask if you're just going to keep taking it off? Anyways, Tech Girl informs him of who Cassie is, and he realises that this is the kid of Constance. So Cassie and the girls arrive at a motel, and everyone right at this moment decides to give their sad backstories to Cassie about why they can't go to their parents and that they need to stay with her. That night, Cassie ends up having a dream, and somehow Ezekiel can talk to her through these dreams, telling her that the girls will get powers and kill him, so he is going to kill them first, and that she doesn't need to die with them. In the motel, Cassie decides to teach them CPR in case any of them get poisoned in the future, as Cassie is the only one who seems to be immune to it. As she tells them about her mother and what happened in the Amazon, she decides to leave the girls with Ben while she goes to Peru to seek out answers from the tribesmen. So, how is she going to leave the country and get to South America, considering that she's a wanted woman and the authorities will spot her if she tries to fly there? Well, that's a good question. The movie's explanation is fuck you. She got on a plane and she made it there fine, stop asking questions. Having made her way to the Amazon, Cassie follows her mother's notes and finds the tribesman who helped her birth at the start of the film. He explains to Cassie her mother's backstory, as well as the fact that Ezekiel is apparently cursed for taking the spider. He then proceeds to, I'm not exactly sure on this, push her spirit into the pool? Not a fucking clue what he actually does. We see her standing on the rock and a glowy version of her falling into the pool. So I think that's what's supposed to have happened, but I really can't tell you. So at first the visions just recap what we've already seen at the start of the film, before showing us in the doctor's room where the doctor explains to Constance that Cassie will be born with a muscular disease, with Constance saying that she doesn't want this, that the doctor is wrong saying that there's no cure for it, and that she will find help in the Amazon. So, to sum up what kickstarted this entire story in this film, Constance went to the Amazon to look for magical mythical spiders because she didn't want a disabled child, and the movie frames this as a girl boss moment. Cassie then imagines herself hugging her mother and forgiving her and saying that she's sorry for hating her. And the movie treats this like some kind of major conclusion to a character arc or something, but besides one offhand remark near the start of the film, the idea that Cassie hates her mother is basically non-existent as far as I remember. So this big celebratory moment had me scratching my head at first because it feels like they just pulled this out of their ass with no build up whatsoever. So Cassie is accepting of her mother now, and apparently this is the key to unlocking her powers. Somehow. I'm not quite sure how, but I'll accept it. The tribesman then tells her that while she doesn't have the physical abilities of Ezekiel, she can use her future visions to not only outsmart Ezekiel, but somehow see the future, which will allow her to unlock the power to create clones of herself. Again, not quite sure how that works, but I'll accept it. And then we get to the part everyone was waiting to see how they would fuck it up. One of the most iconic lines in comic book history that was revised for this movie. So the tribesman tells Cassie, "When you take on the responsibility, great power will come." In Spider-Man, the phrase, "with great power comes great responsibility," is supposed to highlight the fact that while these powers will give the wielder extraordinary abilities and the potential to do things that some people can only dream of, the wielder of these powers will have to come to terms with the fact that they will have to make great sacrifices to have them, with the moral responsibility of them outweighing personal gain. When you take on the responsibility, great powers will come is the exact opposite of that. It's telling Cassie that while she will have some burdens on her in order to achieve these powers, it's okay, because in the end, she'll be getting some super cool powers that she can do whatever she wants with them. This phrase comes across as something a supervisor would tell someone if they want to become the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. Not the words of someone trying to instill great moral fibre or some nobility into someone. As the girls hide out with Ben, Mary begins to give birth. Wow, what a coincidence. Mary starts to give birth 4 weeks before she's supposed to, at the exact same time that Ben is in charge of 3 girls that are being hunted by the big bad. And then for some reason, instead of just hunkering down in the house while Ben takes her to the hospital, all of the girls decide to come with them, allowing the tech girl to spot them and track them down for Ezekiel. So Cassie arrives back in the US, and she arrives back at the house in the stolen taxi. And how the fuck has this thing not been picked up by the police now? She went to Peru for like a week, and this thing was just sat there at the airport, but no one bothered to get it? As Cassie tries to get in the house, she realises that they've gone to the hospital. She then proceeds to steal an ambulance from the team that was responding to the emergency call, and begins to head to the hospital. Tech Girl hacks into the traffic lights, causing a traffic pileup that stops Ben's car. And while this happens, Ezekiel just sits on top of a billboard and doesn't do anything for a good 30 seconds. Then, instead of just tossing the grenade at the car and staying a safe distance, he decides to jump right on top of the car before pulling the pin, causing him to stand there even longer. What he could have done in 5 seconds has now been stretched out to well over a minute. Now, this next part is fucking funny. So Cassie is in the parking garage behind the billboard, and so she decides to ram through it knowing that Ezekiel is there. And I need you to pay attention to what I'm saying here because the editing and choreography of this scene is astoundingly bad. So the camera cuts to Ezekiel on the hood of the car, showing that the ambulance is going to head towards him to crash into him. Now, as you can tell, an ambulance crashing into him would also crash into the car, killing the girls, Mary and Ben. So how does the film solve this issue? It then proceeds to change the positioning of the ambulance so that it's now flying slightly over the top of the car and therefore won't kill the occupants by accident. But that begs the question, how does she save the team if she isn't going to crash towards Ezekiel? Well, despite the fact that the ambulance is absolutely nowhere near crashing into him or the car, Ezekiel jumps off the car bonnet and into the path of the ambulance, splattering him. Just to reiterate that, in this section of the plot, Ezekiel, who can end this right here and now and never have to worry about these girls killing him ever again, decides to hang around for about a minute doing absolutely nothing. And then when Cassie bursts through the billboard and isn't anywhere close to hitting him, he deliberately jumps in the way of the ambulance, stopping his own plan and saving the lives of the girls. The incompetency of this directing is fucking astounding. So, the grenade blows up next to Ezekiel, injuring him. It also blows up one of the vehicles in the traffic jam, but if none of the characters seem to give a shit about the fact that someone just died because of what Cassie did, I'm not going to either. As Cassie gets the girls into the ambulance and tells Ben to get Mary to safety, Ezekiel is looking at them as Cassie drives off. And for some reason he doesn't try and use Ben and Mary as hostages, he just lets them go, despite the fact that he knows that they have a relationship with Cassie. As the ambulance starts speeding away, we're treated to a great shot of Ezekiel awkwardly stumbling on top of a taxi before starting to jump, implying that this bumbling moron will somehow catch up to an ambulance going 40 miles per hour. But, surprise surprise, he does catch up to them. somehow. The girls charge up the defibrillators and use them on the ambulance roof when Ezekiel jumps on top of the ambulance, electrocuting him and allowing them to knock him off. As the ambulance breaks down, Cassie has a vision of the future and learns exactly what she needs to do. They then arrive at the building where the medical officer died, and Cassie then says that the building is full of explosives, fireworks, and is structurally unsafe. I'm sorry, but you're telling me that the authorities just left this crumbling wreck of a building full of dangerous explosives and fireworks just out in the open for any dickhead off the street to wander into? Why were these things not taken out? Why wasn't something constructed around the building to keep it sealed off? And if doing either of those things was too dangerous to do, then why aren't the police here guarding this thing? What an absolutely lazy and contrived solution to deal with the big bad. It just spawns them a building full of explosives. The girls proceed to fill the crates around them with flares, setting off some of the fireworks and the explosives. When Ezekiel arrives, instead of just running after them like a normal person, he does this weird leapfrog thing where he hops from crate to crate, slowing him down and giving the girls enough time to run away as he gets hit by explosives. As they reach a dead end, one of the fireworks follows them down and hits the brick wall, destroying it and allowing them to get into the stairwell. That's right, people, we're dealing with Deus Ex fireworks in this film. As we get to the top, fireworks start to explode part of the roof, sending debris and shrapnel everywhere. We then get a really poorly edited scene where Dakota Johnson just waves a big piece of metal around awkwardly to block the fireworks. And the movie does these weird cuts and slow motion to hide the fact that no one on this set knew how to film this sequence. As they get to the helicopter, Ezekiel arrives, who deflects one of the fireworks into the helicopter, destroying it. I didn't realise that fireworks could destroy a helicopter with one hit, but Madam Web says it's true, so it must be true. As Ezekiel pins Cassie to the ground, he chooses to lecture her and awkwardly chokes her instead of instantly crushing her throat, allowing Matty to awkwardly slide down on a piece of metal and distract him, although he knocks her over the edge and leaves her dangling. As Cassie gets back up, Ezekiel kinda awkwardly puts his hand on her shoulder and throws her to the floor, and it just looked really goofy. I'm still not sure why he doesn't just punch her to death or throw her off the building, but whatever. Anya throws something at Ezekiel, who throws it back at her, and when she goes to dodge it, of all the places she could jump, she decides to jump directly towards the massive crumbling hole in the ceiling, falling through and dangling above the fire on a metal beam. And then Julia tries to attack him, and so he just kind of pushes her off the side. So now all three of the girls are just dangling down, useless. All Ezekiel needs to do now is kill Cassie and then quickly kill the girls and he's sorted. So what happens instead? He decides to just stand there looking as Cassie activates her super move, where she creates 3 clones of herself to help the girls back on their feet. And only after they're all safe does he decide that this is the time to attack her. So how does Cassie know she can do this, and what training do we see her do before this? Absolutely nothing. She just pulls it out of her ass to save the day. You want to know how the big bad is defeated, don't you? Well, let me tell you. This guy, with super strength, super speed, and enhanced reflexes, decides to awkwardly stumble after Cassie as she climbs onto a big neon sign. As she does so, he continues to awkwardly bumble after her, and eventually she gets him right underneath a big neon letter, which explodes and falls on top of him, trapping him. The whole sign then starts to fall apart, which causes him to be sent to the pavement, and then one of the letters falls off, crushing him. Yep, that's right. No superpowers are used or anything, he just dies from having a sign fall on him. Cassie also falls, but she lands in the water nearby. As she falls in the water, a firework flies through and hits her in the face, destroying her eyes, and she slowly drowns. The girls find her and drag her back up, and using their CPR skills, she is revived. As Mary gives birth to Peter, Cassie is treated in hospital. As the nurse comes in and asks if the girls are immediate family, Cassie says yes, and while I have no idea how these people came to like and love each other, the script says that's what happened, so I must be wrong. Also, the issue of Cassie running away from the police, stealing the car, fleeing the country, all that stuff, it just never gets resolved. She's just apparently innocent with no explanation. After being discharged from the hospital, the 4 girls now live together, and Cassie says that they will become superheroes, going around in suits being in awkward, shaky, poorly choreographed fights with bumbling criminals that keep falling over, with the movie ending with all 4 of them in their suits watching over the city. Let me tell you, this film is the Room of superhero movies. Forget Catwoman, forget Elektra, or Daredevil, or Blade 3, forget any of the recent DC or Marvel films. Hell, even forget Morbius. Somehow they have downgraded from Morbius. So all I'm saying is, do you want to see a superhero movie that's so bad it's amazing? Go see Madam Web. It's one of the best worst experiences in my life. The plot makes so little sense, I'm surprised this script even got approved in the first place. The characters are so paper thin and switch personalities so frequently I struggle to even call them characters. The final 10 minutes of the film are supposed to be a demonstration of how they bonded and became a team, but I genuinely cannot tell you why. The bad guy is also just that, a bad guy. There is no depth to him or anything, he is just evil for the sake of being evil. The action scenes are very poorly choreographed, relying on quick cuts, shaky cams and things happening off screen to try and convince you that something coherent is happening on screen. The CGI in this film makes all the CGI of the late 1990s look like God's gift. I laughed at the jokes and a lot of the comedy that this film offers. Not because they're good, very few of them are, but because they're so awkwardly executed that I couldn't help but laugh at the complete ineptitude of their delivery. The music is generic and boring. Put a gun to my head and ask me to hum a piece that appears and I'm just going to pull the trigger myself because I genuinely cannot tell you anything. The movie hyped this up as some sort of ensemble film that would end with the girls all geared up at the end of the film to fight the big bad, but most of the time they are only in costume in dream sequences or future visions. The only time we see them in what I think are current day events in costume is about 10 seconds before the movie ends. No joke, we see Madam Web's costume on display for maybe 15 seconds and that's it, despite the heavy promotion showing the suit. And finally, the acting. Emma Roberts as Mary Parker and Adam Scott as Ben Parker do a decent job, but everyone else's performances are so bad that either the directing was so poor that they couldn't use any of their acting chops, or they knew how shit this film was going to be and just could not be bothered to waste their talent on it. By the way, this movie has no idea how CPR is done, do not follow its advice for the most part. It's just used for every single injury that appears in the film, and no defibrillators are even used to revive people. It's hilarious because apparently you can just get people to start breathing again by bouncing off their chests. Overall, I had a blast watching this film. Such a shallow, basic, incoherent, almost rushed project that I really can't help but recommend it. Seriously, it's so stupid that you can't help but laugh at how bad it is. Don't see this movie in the theatres obviously, we don't want Sony to get away with this sort of shit in the future, but I highly recommend that you find a site to watch this on and just enjoy yourself. It's an absolute treasure. In terms of the badness scale, this movie definitely tops Morbius, there's no question about it. Thanks for watching lads and lasses. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking, subscribing and checking out some of my other videos. Sharing always helps, and if you're feeling really generous, please consider my Patreon or YouTube membership. I also have a Twitter and occasionally I do live streams. But overall, I just hope you had a great day and hopefully I will see you in the next video.